FromSoft's masterclass in action combat is a cozy thrill that never gets old. Your dexterity, pattern recognition, quick twitch strategy, and execution are all that matter. With this, we're throwing the ranking series arms race to the wayside in favor of embracing the mantra, nah, I'd win. Sekiro is a simple shinobi with a moonlight-tinged katana, one we'll be using to slice our way through the game's bosses from cupcake start to electrifying finish. It'll come as a surprise to absolutely nobody that the folding screen monkeys remain Sekiro's easiest encounter from your first playthrough to your last. Kill the first one instantly behind you, stealth sugar to avoid the cat and mouse chase with the second, Goomba stomp the third, sneak up on the fourth, GG. My execution was sloppy, alerting the apes, letting the green one slip through my fingers. If the stealth sugar does fail you, their puzzles require little effort to overcome. Knock white out of stationary invisibility, sneak up on orange, deafen green, and blind purple. You can use the bell to reset the monkeys as many times as you like, giving you infinite opportunities at the perfect setup. I celebrate taking risks with unique design. It's worth it when lightning strikes. Unfortunately, the monkeys are a swing and a miss by every measure. It takes a lot to be easier than a boss you never fight. While Corrupted Monk is very much mandatory for every route, there are ample blueprints to minimize the obligation. You could go the simple route of Snap Seed and Firecracker spam to posture damage. Better yet, forego combat entirely in favor of a stealthy approach. Monk's unique entrance animation lends itself to trickery. You can skirt the arena boundary without tipping it off. From a side angle, you can use Snap Seeds and Fistfuls of Ash to yoink the monk backward. A skip and a hop off the nearby obelisk nets an instant death blow. While this looks easy, it's more precise than you'd expect. There's timing and rhythm to manage in order to pull the monk back far enough for the KO. You aim for a specific rock to start snapping, dash forward after 2 snaps, and keep a constant flow of ash going to maintain the recoiled animation lock. I've personally had more than enough practice to pull it off with little effort, but the error margin here is being subjected to the fight in full force, as opposed to the monkeys who do little to threaten you even on high alert. When the first Google result for your name gives this gem, we'll count our lucky stars we have the tools to trivialize it. Now, I'm sure I have you on board with monkeys as the easiest. Perhaps I lost a few of you, judging the monk based on fancy exploits. How then, I wonder, will you take Headless Ape as the third easiest? It's Guardian Ape, arbiter of countless rage thumbnails across YouTube, fighting you with both of his phases at once. Yes, I too remember getting aped all over in my first playthrough. These days, I enter the cave's back door, inject Yashiriku's sugar, throw a purple party on my sword, and go to town with leaping mortal draws. It may look like there's a method to the madness like Monk, but there isn't. I spammed R1 and weapon arts before the ape's wife could even get a word in edgewise. This isn't even making the most of power stacking. This footage was with 7 attack power directly after fighting the Guardian Ape. While many strategies I employ require finesse, trouncing Headless Ape is a trial in showing it who the real Unga Bunga Prime Ape is. The screaming jockey of the Ashina Vanguard, Gyobu Masataka Oniwa, is all bark and no bite. Firecracker stuns, scheduled stun locks after a set amount of hits, and Akko-powered R1 spam forced him into panicked retreats. Those are easy opportunities to swing in for more offense, ending this encounter swiftly. I can at least give him credit for locking you out of serious power scaling behind him in Ashina Castle and beyond, and I do respect his range, diverse kit, and early game damage output, even if it is a little too simple to minimize for seasoned deflectors. At least bosses like Divine Dragon make up for their lack of difficulty with style. Spidey swinging your way through the clouds to seize lightning, and Pierce the Beast is a breathtaking experience. The dragon does pack a mighty punch. On top of the first phase miscreants that poison greedy players definitely unlike myself. It's not enough to overcome the on-rail mechanics though, that are evaded simply by dashing in a perpendicular line and jumping when you hear a Stark sound cue. Using sugars cuts the lightning necessary to reach and rage down to 3, sabotaging the likelihood of mistakes even further. I'll never regret risking it all for Immortal Severance, even if the stakes for this chapter are woefully underbaked. Genichiro Ashina is the wall for newbies that pushes you to embrace the deflect dance. For a first playthrough, I would argue he's one of the game's hardest bosses. Once you've mastered the art of Sekiro's rhythm, that difficulty wanes dramatically, as seen in regular curb stomps of him on the way to the Sword Saint. It's a masterful telling of Sekiro and the player's honed skills over your journey, even if it does neuter Genichiro in future playthroughs. Your skills are one thing, game knowledge is equally powerful. perhaps more in Sekiro than any of the previous games in this ranking series. It's a curse that leads to some truly diabolical tech. You can consistently dash past Genichiro, bait him into the corner, leap over his swipe into a lethal dead angle stun lock. It does require good timing and deliberate pauses after every few hits to reset your combo, so it's not completely free. Taking this route still forces you to face the third phase, though lightning reflex and mastery of this duel makes it almost easier than baiting the door loop. There's enough room for error here with backbow dashes, mix-ups between sweeps and thrusts, and reasonable damage to punish mistakes, but it's not nearly enough for Genichiro to ascend beyond bottom-tier competition. Great Shinobi Owl echoes Genichiro's first playthrough sentiment. Whereas the whole game to this point encouraged posture build-up through deflection, Owl is best dealt with through vitality damage. Thanks to his absurd posture recovery, you have to change up your game plan while dealing with his trickery. Smoke bombs, firecrackers, healing debuffs, shuriken, he pulls out all the stops to make this fight as unfair as possible. It's only right we shove him in the corner like Genichiro. I'm surprised Eo fits. His stature makes combo throttling unnecessary. Go ham until the death blow, back off and quick step through the smoke, and continue your assault unto death. The catch is the difficulty of pinning Owl down. Unlike Genichiro, he has a variety of openers, many of which require you to abuse knowledge of his moveset and dead angle attacks to kite him in the corner. Doing so can be harder to pull off than fighting him normally, but I've spent enough time practicing to pull it off reliably, sending Owl tumbling out of the top 10. Back with a vengeance, True Corrupted Monk makes up for her illusionary speed bump. Phase 1 is a sampler using the same moveset as the Spectre, a methodical series of sweeps and slams with an off-kilter cadence ripe for mistakes. If you make it through unscathed, Phase 2 is a free leaping death blow from above, avoiding her phantom flurries entirely. The final phase is the true test, where she trades her wider kit in favor of terror attacks, more devastating damage, and a series of swings forcing perfect deflection to evade death. This sequence is a perfect example of varied timings mid-combo, with an ever so slight delay between the second and third hit. These mix-ups lull me into bad inputs even after hours of practice for speedruns. Frankly, the only reason she doesn't rank higher is in a casual run, I have the posture and vitality to withstand those errors. With her one-shot potential nullified, Monk becomes a more manageable middle ground to define the difficulty floor for Sekiro's mid-range. Monk isn't the only boss with an upgraded form. The Gauntlets of Strength update introduced reimagined, inner versions of Sekiro's major players, Genichiro, Owl, and Isshin. I was particularly excited by this, as this ranking is the first time I ever faced them. Of them, inner Genichiro is by far the easiest, though that's not to say it's a cakewalk. Your previous experience against him is both a boon and a hindrance. You'll maintain tempo well until he unleashes unanticipated weapon arts and skills. Arrows are now followed by a chasing slice. He cancels combos into imposing weapon arts. His ultimate skill, Sakura Dance, unleashes a trio of massive horizontal sweeps. Even his lightning in the final phase is no longer an advantage. He counters your reversal with a bounce back of his own now. Strategies and openings I relied on no longer worked, shoving him into the corner notwithstanding, forcing me into a more aggressive approach, where I applied attack density demanding he deflect to minimize the appearance of his new tricks. They still pop up with enough regularity I needed an adequate response. Endgame posture is enough to withstand slightly mistimed weapon art or chasing slice deflections, and Sakura Dance can be evaded at the right moment to counter and shred vitality, which is equally true for the lightning re-reversal. To be honest, it took little time to adapt these new tricks, even if they are a good bit more demanding than his original design. It's ironic that accessing Genichiro's apex is locked behind a boss superseding him. Lady Butterfly is the queen of early game bosses. Whereas Genichiro's timings are all very methodical, Butterfly uses spins, odd angles, leaps, back steps, and gap closers to constantly mix you up in close proximity. She can negate counters with swift repositioning, often on hanging wires. Using Shuriken to fumble her footing is key both to create openings and avoid her scary follow-ups. With hardly enough time to download Phase 1 by its end, Phase 2 adds tracking magic to many attacks, tightening deflect windows while layering vitality damage. Her signature move is summoning a battalion of illusionary warriors. Unless you possess the very limited snap seeds, your best bet is to sprint wildly to avoid tandem assaults. Eventually, she'll snap them out of existence herself, though her method involves creating magic from their spirit, sending it spiraling towards you with homing effect. You may be ready to easily evade it all, but this passive approach comes at the cost of all the posture damage you've built. Keeping pressure on Lady Butterfly throughout both phases while minimizing your own mistakes is more demanding than anything thus far by a wide margin. She's the apex predator of the early game, only surpassed by a single non-endgame boss, the always polarizing Guardian Ape. I was all ready to boast how much I've tamed the beast, and forgot to buy mid-air combat arts to get the guaranteed Mortal Draw stun in the opener. Doing so, you can loop Guardian Ape for the entire first phase with deliberately timed inputs. It's not easy at all to do without practice, but it is leagues more trivial than dealing with him on all fours causing chaos. His attacks in this phase are some of the trickiest in the game to deflect, with huge hitboxes, weird timings, and tons of grabs to throw off anticipation. Those grabs have disgusting active frames, leading to many calls of bullshit as he slams you from seemingly perfect evasive leaps. If you can survive the beastly brawl, phase 2 embodies more controlled chaos. The sword is easier to deflect, in theory, made more difficult by offbeat timings to rival Corrupted Monk. Missing a single deflection ruins him being locked in, typically subjecting you to the terror scream, forcing disengagement. If you do pull off all of the deflections, you'll get a chance to stagger him, penetrating his defenses quite literally with the spear to disembowel the parasite within. Reliability doesn't spell ease though. Execution here is some of the highest demanded in the game, with an error margin compressed due to the endurance required. Forget all about his lore. Guardian Ape's foremost moniker is given for his presence as Sekiro's true wall. If you hope to stand any chance in the game's final hours, you must prove yourself to the true apex predator. As we enter the endgame, I must first pay penance for bullying the elderly. Owlfather reimagines Daddy Dearest in his prime. He employs a similar kit with more nimble movements, aggressive follow-ups, and a few new tricks up his sleeve. This is especially true in the second phase, where his ethereal owl allows him to transcend reality. Masking openings as a fading specter, he'll counter you in the blink of an eye, a brutal gambit for you to deflect. This is matched by his fire volley into arena-length thrust, much more manageable to leap and Makiri, honestly a boon in a fight where openings can feel insurmountable to find. In spite of his new advantages, he relies far more on his blade than Shinobi tools here. That allows you to keep more consistent pressure via the deflection dance, limiting the endurance factor. By this point, you should be approaching advanced skill in that system. Pressing your advantage feels easier as a result, limiting Owlfather from the exponential peaks to come. A peak that was once defined by a boss I ranked as a top 10 hardest of the 2010s, the aptly named Demon of Hatred. Perhaps he was more ferocious in my memory, or my replay of the 5 Souls games beforehand made me well equipped to fall back into a dodge-heavy style. Typically it's jarring going back to that style after Sekiro demands you deflect, but if you're ready for it, using the spacing, strafing, and patience those games demand works wonders here. That and a hefty dose of buffs, and the mighty malcontent. You can use this whistle for a lengthy stun 3 times throughout the fight, moments I reserved for 1 use in P2 to regain tempo, and twice at the start of the 3rd phase to limit its chaos. Putting a huge dent into the scarier portions of the fight increased the error margin dramatically. I was surprised just how much time there is to recover as long as you stay in close. He does use the Claw Dash to gain distance, but I found most attacks from range are easy to evade, with long animations that allow you to close the gap fully. His primary advantage in the face of excellent execution is his deep vitality. Boasting the highest total in the game, the endurance nature matched with his bonkers damage in the event you do make mistakes, nigh ensures you'll be depleting your gourd. It's difficult enough to still strike fear into me every time I enter the battle-torn remains of Gyobu's arena, even if Soul's mastery employed effectively limits his strengths. Atop many Sekiro boss ranking lists, you'll find Isshin the Sword Saint. As I see the number 4 appear on screen, it feels wrong. By all accounts, this is one of FromSoft's most demanding base encounters. Genichiro may be an afterthought at this point, but he holds enough potency to whittle resources if you let your mind wander to the next phase. Isshin's first phase is very manageable. If you attack relentlessly, you can lock him into a sequence where he counters every few hits with a few guaranteed follow-ups. 1, 2 even keel slashes you can deflect, 2 a delayed stomp to deflect into a thrust, and 3 sheathing his blade into an uppercut slash and sweep. You deflect the slashes, Mikiri the thrust, and Goomba the sweep. If you maintain this pressure, you can enter phase 2 with relative ease. This is where the real battle begins. Allowing Isshin free reign to glock and cock you with his spear might be worthy of higher contention. There is no boss with more shakeups mid-combo that defy rhythm, exploiting your expectations. Many of said combos number in the 5+ attack range, making those exploits break posture and deliver lethal follow-ups. The sole strategy here is to limit that offensive pressure. You must, without pause, attack once after every attack and be ready for a few options. He does nothing, and you attack a second time, followed by a double deflect. He does the backstep leaping sweep, which must be evaded forward to maintain pressure. If you greed your second hit expecting the first option, you will take massive damage. And that ignores the third option where he does the charge sweep, and the fourth where he does backsteps without any attack at all, demanding immediate reaction and quick step to maintain pressure. This strategy is far less foolproof than the first phase. A single lapse lets the spearman wreak havoc freely. If you can manage all that though, the final phase is more of the same with lightning reversals to shorten the endurance required. But it's all RNG outside of the opener. I've gone plenty of third phases with only that single lightning to assist me. And keep in mind, you need to use health as a resource to allow you to do a reversal, something that is likely in short supply after the blood, sweat, and many gourds to reach this point. All of this in mind, how could there be 3 bosses harder than Isshin? It's all a matter of time invested. I have an absurd amount of practice logged against him. I have spent, no exaggeration, at least 10 hours over the years practicing this fight, and that's with no prayer beads and the bare minimum attack power to reach him. Honed in those roaring flames of difficulty, it's no surprise that with max vitality and posture to override mistakes, and a full 14 attack power, I made him look like child's play on my sole attempt. Even so, I know how arduous reaching this point of skill was, unlike all others before him that took a mere handful of attempts to master. It's for that reason alone that his elderly self ascends a notch higher. Shinobi Ashina plays on muscle memory built like a brick house to my disadvantage. You know that phase 1 loop I mentioned? It does work here. That is until Isshin jukes your first hit with a spinning slice. It's embarrassing how often I get caught by this. You can deflect it if you catch it, but I will never anticipate it after hours of looping the Sword Saint. Add in relentless pressure in a smaller arena, making healing and buffing more difficult, a brutal grab, and furious flames throughout the second phase, and you've got a recipe for getting roasted. At least most of the fire attacks can be straight for a punish, the exception being Judgment Cut. You can minimize this by leaving the burn and deflecting loosely, but it's plenty daunting amidst all his other pressure. He is only 2 phases compared to the Sword Saints 3, and replaces Genichiro with Emma, who I would sadly argue is a cakewalk these days, as long as you can anticipate the grab. Attacking until she deflects, then deflecting her single follow-up into more attacks handles 90% of her kit. Adding in Sugar Charge weapon arts makes it even more stompable. Isshin's last-ditch effort to stop Shura ensuing after is what earns such a high ranking. Keep in mind, without access to Fountainhead, your attack power is greatly capped, preventing you from overscaling with the Dragon Mask to give greater advantage in the endgame. Limited preparation, experience, and shakeups that feel specifically targeted to exploit Sword Saint muscle memory earns the elderly Isshin a narrow nod over his prime. Oops, all Isshin. The third entry in a row for Ashina's Elite is his perfect form, the reimagined Inner Isshin. The core of what worked against the Sword Saint applies here. All the loops remain, as does the lightning reversal, unlike Inner Genichiro. What he gains are massive attacks that force you to get out of dodge, which resets your loops, forcing you into the brunt of his offense until re-established. This is particularly daunting with his harder pursuit, with many new attacks having insane gap closers. Even inside the loop, you must recognize new, faster follow-ups like the uppercut slash into sweep. Anything to throw Isshin off script makes this leagues more complicated, even if mastery of his core still allowed me to overcome it on my second attempt. Completing a bookend to our endgame upper class, it is an enhanced Isshin ascending to the game's greatest heights. The #1 honor is reserved for Inner Father. To be blunt, it's not even close. When you consider my primary speedrun experience ignores Outfather and nullifies the Great Shinobi through dead angles, I faced Owl about as much as your average Sekiro completionist. That's enough to deal with Outfather reasonably well. It is not enough to deal with that kit adding brutal weapon arts to extend combos, on top of Mist Raven instant evasion and follow-ups. Being able to nullify any advantage on a dime with an immediate counter ruins your rhythm, and demands the fastest reaction speed the game has ever asked. This is made all the worse by the animation, with feathers obscuring tells, requiring you to memorize common attacks out of it. Then when you consider his second health bar already had similar phases in and out of reality, you spend more time whiffing than getting hits in. He starts chaining multiple Mist Ravens into Fiery Owl dashes now coming from varied angles that if you fail to dodge, both damages you and disables the free Makiri. That's vital posture damage lost in a fight that makes you earn every inch of it. Honestly, the Mist Raven counter speed is the closest I've ever come to calling something in this game unfair, but it is reactable with a bit of practice. And I admire how much the smell of BS embodies Owl's fighting style. Even with practice, this is far less exploitable than Isshin. It'll take all of your cunning, dexterity, and resources to overcome Owl at his true peak. And that's Sekiro combat at its finest. Replaying this game is always a true joy. Funneling character growth into besting bosses and mini-bosses almost exclusively is the perfect design DNA for my preferences. While Sekiro's combat sacrifices build variety many cherish in other FromSoft games, removing the need to balance and design such a wide pool clearly allowed them to hone a single style to perfection. Next time we'll continue to what many consider the true peak of FromSoft's collective style in Elden Ring. In the meantime, check out my new series coming later this week, exploring lesser-known games in a ranking based on themes. The first episode being based around action, with many games inspired by Sekiro, including a fusion of it and Hollow Knight to rival the Metroidvania masterpiece. I hope to create a growing catalog of recommendations and entertainment for gaming enthusiasts to enjoy, and perhaps some games with bosses worth ranking. Thank you all so much for your support, and I'll see you soon in the lands between.